All right, what's up, gang? Long time no see. Back at it for the first time in a while here on the DawgsCentral YouTube channel. It has been, I think, since prior to the SEC championship game since we've been on here. Lots of changes since then, kind of in my professional life. We at DawgsCentral have joined over with the guys at the Players Lounge. Keith Marshall, Aaron Murray, and their project, and sort of become the forum community for those guys. And I've been doing a whole lot of content with them, which has been super exciting. And yeah, looking forward to kind of sharing more details on what we've got going on over there, and bringing you guys a lot of good content as we move closer and closer to spring practice and all the way into the 2024 season. Wanted to bring back the Ask Dog Central show. It's been a while since we've done one of these. Our subscribers have always seemed to enjoy this format. So without further ado, jump straight into it. Kind of the big news, I guess, in the Georgia sphere of the last 24 hours is I don't want to call it an accusation, but the claim, I guess, would be the proper terminology, that Dominic Raiola, the father of Dylan Raiola, told Adam Gorney with Rivals in a show interview, I guess, yesterday morning, that Kirk Herbstreit told his son, or told him to tell his son, basically, that he should come there. His exact quote, so I don't get this wrong and don't say anything that's not true. Dominic Raiola's exact quote was, when he is Herbstreit in this instance, saw the smoke about Dylan entertaining Nebraska, he called me. Quote, dude, is this true? He has got to do it. He's got to do it. And then Raiola went on to say that Herbstreit's affinity for Nebraska, for a guy like that to tell me and get behind me, I knew he in this instance is Dylan, I knew he needed to do it. But I wasn't going to sit here and say, you need to go change that place or be a part of the change of that place. So simply put here, the father of a five-star quarterback who was once committed to Georgia is saying that a call from probably the biggest face in college football media, kind of, helped sway or justify maybe the decision making of his son ending up at Nebraska. Now, let's be honest here. Dominic Raiola, if that is true, if that's what Kirk Herbstreit actually said to him, then Dominic Raiola Kirk Herbstreit told Dominic Raiola exactly what he wanted to hear. Okay, the guy is a Nebraska alum. He loves Nebraska. Even, I think late in the cycle, before the flip had actually been formally completed, he made a comment of like, why wouldn't he visit there? It's a great school. Like, it feels like he's kind of been apologizing in a weird way, or justifying the need to be in consideration, or for Nebraska to be considered by his son, throughout the recruiting process. So it was never a shock that Dylan ended up at his dad's alma mater, where, his uncle is the offensive line coach. Like, there was a lot of connections there. There still are a lot of connections there. I do think it opens up a big can of worms. The guys over at the AJC with Dog Nation, they've been covering the story pretty closely. They, put out some images, I guess, on Twitter and also in some of their stories, like, in context of what we are now hearing of, hey, allegedly Kirk Herbstreit had this conversation with Dylan Raiola's dad. Like, this photo doesn't look that good. Okay. Like, you're talking about Herbstreit, who always is trying to keep the impression of impartiality, like, at the forefront of everything he does, whispering in the ear of Georgia's five-star quarterback commit on Georgia's sideline prior to a game. If there was any conversation that happened along the lines of, he's got to do it. He's got to go to Nebraska. Then that is problematic. Like, I've covered UGA recruiting for years now. We've covered it, with DawgsCentral, and like, I've never ever said to a kid, "This is where you should go." I don't want that evil, I don't think anybody does. I don't think most people in this industry will want to be involved with, you know, influencing a decision of a kid. A, it's not our jobs, but B, it's also like I don't want to be responsible if that kid gets somewhere and it's not a good fit for him. It's like there's a lot that goes into these decisions, and everything's value judgment in recruiting. Academics matter a lot to some kids; they maybe don't matter as much to others. Uh, Whether a school has an engineering program, like famously Calvin Johnson went to Georgia Tech because he wanted a degree in engineering. It's just everybody's different, and I don't know what that unique thumbprint looks like for every single prospect, and it's just not our place. So if there is any level of truth to this, like it's a sticky situation for Herbstreit, for ESPN, for College Game Day, because you're talking about a scenario where, hey, we give this guy a ton of access. Like College Game Day comes to town, or ESPN comes to town, and Herbstreit comes to town to do a game. Like, here, Kirk, come into our weight room and interview our entire front seven, or come down and walk on the field pregame and talk to anybody you want to, and basically like move around without the red tape that is normally reserved for a lot of media. And I think, like, do I think this is that big of a deal that's really going to change anything or have any major consequences? No, probably not. Because the reality is that, like, everybody, even Georgia, on some level, not to the extent of most programs, but like even Georgia needs the exposure that ESPN brings, that College Game Day brings. Like, I wouldn't say they need it, but they certainly aren't going to shy away from it, or push it away if ESPN and College Game Day are willing to give it to them. But it does affect how people connected to these programs or connected to these athletic departments, not just Georgia in this scenario, but any college staff. Like, if they felt a TV personality was coming in, or having any influence in recruiting, like that would affect a lot of things. It would affect the way that other Big Ten staffs feel about this guy pushing a 5-star quarterback to a team that they got to play every year on the schedule. It would obviously affect how Georgia would feel about having him on the sideline talking to recruits pregame. Like, is that something that you want to continue doing? So it's a very interesting scenario. We probably won't ever know the truth. To be clear, I want to make sure we give both sides of the story here. Herbstreit, in response to this whole, I guess, scandal, if you want to call it that, went on Feinbaum today, said that's the most ridiculous thing anybody would do, but I did compliment Matt Rule. If I'm guilty of anything, I said Matt Rule is a good coach and he's a good man. I believe he will bring Nebraska back. That's probably true. I believe he said that. It would feel like a lot for him to say he's got to go do it. But either way, like, to be honest, the appropriate answer in that scenario is, I can't answer that question within the context of recruiting. So we'll see if there's any other fallout from it, but it is interesting. And let's be honest, like, College Game Day is not maybe having the greatest, warmest, most fuzzy relationship with Georgia fans lately. Like, you saw David Pollock leave the show, and to be clear, none of these are necessarily related. None of them are I'm not saying there's an anti-UGA agenda at ESPN by any means, but ESPN is the rights holder, the exclusive rights holder for SEC football and SEC men's basketball starting this year and for the next decade. So anything they do in relation to an SEC program, especially one at the top of college football, is going to be news. It is going to be something that's worth analyzing. It's information. And like you had David Pollock uh, get laid off from the network for whatever reason. I don't know. But that happened after, I guess his last live broadcast on ESPN was the national championship game that Georgia, beat TCU in, and the viral clip of him sitting at the desk with Nick Saban saying that Georgia's the new standard. So, you kind of had a Georgia guy on that programming. He leaves, Pat McAfee replaces him. I think Georgia fans, certain factions of the Georgia fan base, I'm not saying on the whole by any means, blamed McAfee for maybe kind of taking Pollock's role in a way, and didn't really support him. And I think, we're vocal about that on social media and things. And so after the SEC championship, he makes a comment on First Take of basically saying, not basically saying, like literally saying Georgia fans can go to hell. So that's not comfortable. And then you get the Herbstreit thing here, and now the rival, you're perhaps your biggest rival over the last few years in Alabama, or your biggest competition for national titles in the SEC over the last few years, has been Alabama. Now Nick Saban retires, he's going to be on the show. It's a weird, interesting dynamic at play there anytime that College Game Day comes to town for the foreseeable future. Again, I'm sure Georgia will give them, I don't think Georgia is going to treat them any differently than they were going to 48 hours ago, but it's just not really something that you want to get into, especially considering the literal rant that Herbstreit went on Twitter in relation to like the FSU fans claiming that, he has an agenda. He sat there and said the most ridiculous thing ever is the idea that I would have an agenda. And now you're basically having a parent of a 5-star recruit say that within the same week that you were tweeting that, you're calling and, saying my son should go to Nebraska. Like, that's not a great look. Those are two very opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how you're kind of living and behaving. So getting into some questions. J-Rab asked, do you expect another long con this coming season with the new schedule and playoff formats, or will Kirby be the destroyer of worlds during the regular season? Very fair question. I think in this new era where you could play as many as 17 games, if I'm not mistaken, with conference championship game and everything else, possible 4 playoff games if you don't, well, no. Yeah, you could play 4. Yeah, so you could play as many as 17 games now. I think what's informative is that Georgia, when they went after Jaden Mayava, the UNLV quarterback who hit the transfer portal this offseason, like Georgia went after him really, really hard, which I think surprised a lot of people because Carson Beck had already announced he was coming back. You have Gunnar Stockton in that room who, former, I think it was ranked as a 5-star at one point, finished the recruiting cycle as a highly ranked 4-star, like good kid that's been in the system, is developing along. And then you brought in Ryan Puglisi, who they loved during bowl practice. Like Puglisi, everyone I've talked to that watched bowl practices, like that dude has, maybe the biggest arm that we've seen at Georgia since Matt Stafford. Big, likes to run, comes around the corner and has broad shoulders. I got to spend some time with him at Elite 11. Like he is all of 6'3". So there's a lot to be excited about with Georgia's quarterback room. The flip side of that is I think what happened to like Florida State last year, where their starting quarterback gets hurt and their season goes up in flames because of it, even though they did finish at 13-0 after the ACC championship game, like that left an impression on people around the sport. And I think Kirby Smart and the Georgia staff is one of the people that it left an impression on. And like they want 4 scholarship quarterbacks in that room, and they want 3 that they feel like can go out there and play at any time. And so, what does that have to do with this question? Well, I think Georgia's habit of sort of using some of these like out of conference G5 opponents and FCS opponents as like practice and kind of playing with their food. I'm sure there will be times where they do that in certain games and they rotate the way that they have before, where, starters are only getting limited snaps on defense. But like, I think, especially with, where Carson Beck is at this point in his career, and being a legit, Heisman candidate, I think you're talking about a very big drop off between him and whoever the backup ends up being. And it's not because the backup won't be a good player. It's because Carson is that good of a player. And so in that case, yeah, like you got to get him out of games. You don't want him taking, you don't want him in there with the backup offensive line against whoever in week 2, whoever they've got. I don't even know between Clemson and Kentucky, but whatever G5 program it is, like, you don't want him taking a big hit off of a backup offensive lineman, young guy that misses a pass protection assignment and everything blows up in his face. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia manages it. Personally, I think that they will probably be a little more urgent in some of these out of conference games and even some of their SEC games against the lower tier teams of the SEC. I think that they will have a higher sense of urgency than they have in the past and look to end those games a little earlier. I don't think they want Carson Beck playing third quarters against the kind of dregs of the league. I do still think there will be a long con element to Georgia's offense in that there will be certain things that they save for the biggest games. I think there will be certain players even that they kind of, wait to feature until they face certain teams on the schedule. Like, I think that's what they were doing with Raiola Thomas in 2023, that, as you sort of built towards that Alabama game, like the Alabama secondary was great, and a lot of Georgia's receivers were struggling to get separation in with those against those guys, especially with Bowers and McConkey hurt. That is a scenario where Raiola Thomas, that's why you brought him in, is because he doesn't need separation to be open. So you never really got to see that come to fruition. I think you'll still have some of that next year, especially with some of these transfer wide receivers like a Colby Young. Does it take him a month to kind of really get in rhythm and understand what's going on with the scheme? And then you get to Austin, Texas or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and all of a sudden it's like, hello, that guy is pulling down 4 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. But I do think there will always be parts of the playbook that are saved. I don't think Georgia's going to run like a fake reverse play action pass against, whoever, even against maybe Clemson in week 1. Like, that's a game that Georgia should win by, 14 to 17 points, even without their, fastball from a play calling standpoint. Like, so it'll be interesting. Opal like a dog, kind of moving on with 2024. You asked, given the difficulty of our 2024 schedule, do you still see an undefeated regular season as a possibility, or is that a bridge too far? It feels like, for me right now, not knowing everything that there is to know about what they're going to be in certain positions, that feels like a bridge too far. 11-1 feels more likely to me than 12-0. Just my gut reaction looking at Georgia's schedule. You've got those 3 road games at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. I think anybody in the country would be thrilled to find themselves going 2-1 in that stretch. Like, I know they're not back to back, but you do get a bye week before Alabama, and before Texas, you get to play Mississippi State at home. That's a little bit of an advantage, but you go to Ole Miss right off of the Florida game, and that Florida game is always emotional. Ole Miss could be in a spot at that point in the season where they kind of need that game to make the playoff. So like that feels like a spot to me where not that Georgia's going to be let down to go and face an Ole Miss team that is probably going to be highly ranked, but it's just hard to have the same level of intensity every week. And I can promise you they're going to be very intense for the Alabama game. I think they're going to feel similarly about Texas, a team that, jumped them on the last week of the season in the playoff rankings because they had a win over Alabama. I think that left a sour taste in some of these guys' mouths. So I would expect Georgia to, if there's a spot sort of that would be worrisome, I think that is it. But you never know. I mean, like you could look up and find yourself in a dogfight with somebody that you're not expecting. Like Georgia had that experience against Auburn this year. I would say that game might feel like Kentucky if it wasn't for the fact that Brock Vandagriff had transferred there. I think not that there's any bad blood there or any of these guys like don't understand why he transferred out or anything like that. I think he did his part for the Georgia football program while he was in Athens, but like playing against a former teammate just kind of comes with a little more competitive juice. And in Georgia's case, I think that they'll have a very good idea. Not that I don't think it. I know that they will have a very good idea of what does he bring to the table. What do we want to make Brock Vandagriff do in order to be successful in this game? What do we think that is going to be problematic for him as a quarterback if the defense puts him in the situation where he has to do this to be successful? And so I think if you're a Georgia fan, you can kind of feel good about that early road trip to Kentucky, especially getting a week against Tennessee Tech before that game, coming off of the Clemson opener. But yeah, I mean, I just think with all of these sort of, heavyweight fights that Georgia has on the schedule, chances are probably higher than not that they're going to drop one along the way. I don't think that you're talking about and I don't think 9-3 is on the table or anything like that, but like, I do think 11-1 is more likely than 12-0. So that's my position on it. All right. So I've got a couple of questions about Georgia's defensive front here. One from FL Dog 80. Will our DL and pass rush improve next season and potentially return to the dominance we had in 2021, 2022? Secondary should be solid, right? Yeah, I do think Georgia's secondary will be solid. Still some things that need to shake out at that safety position next to Malachi Starks. Like, is KJ Bolden ready in time to perhaps, play a role there early in the season? What is going to be the situation at the star position? Are we going to see Aguero take over there? Like, can he get to know the defensive scheme as a young player quickly enough to really have a grasp on that early in the season? Because that star position really does have a lot of responsibility sometimes in terms of like outside runs and they got to be able to read, run, and pass quickly. And if they read the wrong thing, then you can have a scenario where somebody busts a coverage on the back end and it's an easy touchdown. So like those are things I'm interested to see in the secondary. I just personally think like with all of the talent that is in that room already, add in Ellis Robinson, add in DeMello Jones, all of these guys that are kind of joining the program that are, again, like these super recruits. I just think there's too much. The amount of talent in that cornerback safety room will sort of overwhelm the problem. On the defensive line, I'm going to sort of answer this question with a question, which Opelika Dog brought up, Mikel Williams. kind of, I don't want to say he's moving to outside linebacker because, I think he's still going to play plenty of defensive end, but I do think Georgia is committed to using him as a stand-up pass rusher more, letting him kind of be a true edge at times instead of, he was playing D tackle at times last year and in 2022. Like, he's had a lot of inside gap responsibilities, and he's been kind of a 4-eye defensive end, similar to what they asked Travon Walker to do in 2021 at times. That experiment was successful in the Orange Bowl against Florida State. Like, you saw Mikel line up on the edge and really create a lot of havoc. So I think that will help Georgia in terms of they haven't really had like an alpha dog pass rusher in a while, honestly. I think Nolan Smith was becoming that in 2022 before he got hurt. And I'm not talking about like Jalen Carter was obviously an alpha among alphas. Like that guy was, the best defensive line on Georgia's roster in 2021, even though you had 2 first-round picks at D tackle with him. But he was a defensive tackle. He's not a traditional come off the edge pass rusher. And Georgia hasn't really had that guy who has just, been that kind of consistent havoc creator off the edge in a while. I think Mikel Williams, lining up as a 7 tech at times next year is going to help him with that, being a stand-up pass rusher. Again, that worked for him in the Orange Bowl, but it can't be just him, right? Like, he had 6 pressures against Florida State and 17 pass rush snaps. It's pretty damn good. Granted, FSU offensive line wasn't probably what it was, most of the year with some of those opt-outs, but you go through the rest of 2023, he had 5 pressures against South Carolina, was really, really good that day, and a sack. And then, everywhere else, it's like 1 pressure, 2 pressures, 3 pressures against Vandy, 2 pressures against Florida. So, yeah, I do think taking him out of any sort of, not any, like he'll have some gap responsibility, but freeing him up to use his athleticism is a great decision. But there's also another edge, right? Like there's another edge, and there's no rule that says Georgia only has to have one guy like that. And on third down packages, like we've seen them in the past, have 2 guys standing up, lined up outside the offensive tackle's shoulders and really coming hard. The name that I think people are really excited about for 2024, and by people, I mean people within the program, people close to the program, is Damon Wilson. That guy, in a way, for me, Aaron Murray with the Players Lounge, like he just did an interview with Damon last week. In a way, I think that Damon is kind of the perfect Kirby Smart recruit. Like Damon Wilson, big NIL kid, like had a lot of large offers to go play football for a lot of different really good programs that compete for national titles. Went to Georgia, took, probably less money to do so, did it because he believes in the development, and, really is fully bought into everything that they're asking him to do. He's been watching tape to understand not just what his positional responsibilities are, but like if Georgia's in cover 3, what are the other 10 guys doing around me? So I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I know how to cover for people. There's also some weight gain that I think has happened with him. Like he's gone from, 230, 235 to 245 on his way to 250. Lots of good coaching and practice that he's gotten on technique. Like he's gone from being the best athlete on the field in high school where he could just bowl over guys to, I got to learn how to use long arms and use my, agility and have some more technical pass rush skills. So I think as we move into 2024, if you're talking about third down packages and you've got Mikel on one side and you've got Damon Wilson on the other side, like I think that's going to be very formidable for Georgia, and I think that's what's going to look like. On the interior of the defensive line, Georgia needs guys to, play up to their rankings straight up. Nazir Stackhouse, really good in 2022 when playing next to Jalen Carter. I think kind of struggled in 2023 to take that next step that a lot of people thought he would. Georgia was glad to get him back, like very talented player, but I think needs to, take another leap to be exactly what they need him to be. Like, can they get consistent snaps weekly out of Jamal Jarrett? Can they get 20 snaps a game out of him, or even 15 against first team offenses? Like, that would be huge to have a big true nose tackle that starts taking up space. Jordan Hall, I was very impressed with him at times last year. His athleticism, all of that, like he has the 5-star pedigree, and I think he's a better run defender than I thought he would be. Does he take the next step? Same with Kristen Miller. Played in all 13 games, but only had, like 107 pass rush opportunities. I thought made some havoc at times. I saw a little, tidbit go around from PFF last week that I think he was with their top 5 freshman defensive tackles. Like, he was among the top 5 ranked freshman defensive tackles in terms of game grades in 2023. So that's kind of a good indicator. Historically, it's been a good indicator that guys are going to be successful. So all of that's a long-winded way of saying I think there's the talent in the room, but that talent has to start performing. And what would be perfect for Georgia is if they can find a true, like, alpha dog, pardon the pun. They need that guy who, is kind of, you're not going to have another Jalen Carter, I don't think. But you need a guy that has that same sort of presence about him. The guy that, really just, when it's big plays, big downs, big moments in games, is going to come up big and wreck things for you. So that is kind of my thoughts on that one. All right. And then interesting question from Steven. How do you see Georgia's recruiting evolving, considering that arguably the best recruiter of all time, Nick Saban, just retired? It's interesting. On the surface, my initial thought when I read this question 24 hours ago was like, I don't think it changes that much for you. The more I dug into it, though, like, yes, you're in this NIL era now, and I think that has been almost like not unfair by any means, but that's been unfortunate for Georgia, because if Georgia had done what they did with the back-to-back national titles pre-NIL, even though they just signed a number 1 recruiting class, I think they would have like cashed it in with, I'm talking 8 5-stars a class kind of thing. It would not have been a stretch. Just looking at the guys that wanted to come to Georgia in this class for 2024, but didn't for an NIL reason or something, like, I think they could have gotten, 8, 9 5-star kids, not even exaggerating. So yes, now that you're in the NIL era, you're seeing like the top players, those 5-star players, kind of disperse more evenly. But it's the interesting scenario of, I think there were a lot of kids that were going to Alabama because Saban was there, and they were saying, I want to play for the greatest coach of all time. I want to play for the best coach in the sport. So I'm going to go to Alabama, not because it's Alabama, but because that's where Nick Saban is. And now you're seeing a scenario where I think it's more a situation of, if I want to go play for the best coach in the sport, then I'm going to go to Georgia because that's where Kirby Smart is. And so that is going to be very interesting to watch. Obviously, Georgia's pedigree with defensive prospects has been excellent. But, I do think that there are going to be kids on the offensive side of the ball who say, I want to play for the best coach in the sport, so I am going to go to Georgia and play for Kirby Smart. And how that plays out in relation to NIL is going to be interesting. Georgia has shown over the last couple cycles that it's not interested in involving itself in recruitments that are, where NIL, I think, is the main consideration and the main factor in making the decision for the prospect. Much like Alabama was getting with Sabin, and I think Georgia's been getting a discount because of Kirby, and perhaps with Sabin leaving the sport, there might be more kids who, are kind of willing to come to Georgia for less money than they could have gotten at another program. All right. Does the 85 number even matter anymore? Wish the number of legal losses the NCAA has taken over the years with NIL and transfers, or with the number of legal losses the NCAA has taken over the years with NIL and transfers, is the scholarship number the next thing that will go? I don't think it really matters anymore. I mean, let's be honest. Like, if you want to put a kid on scholarship through NIL, you can. That kid's going to have to take the NIL money, and somebody related to that kid is going to have to take the NIL money and physically write a check to the university. But I'm sure somebody has done this. I don't know of it happening firsthand, but it would seem bizarre if somebody hasn't, basically scholarshiped a guy that they wanted to add to their roster without having it count against their 85 number. I don't really know what to make of the 85 right now. I mean, Georgia will probably lose more guys after spring, so I don't want to, jump to, hey, they're at this number of scholarships or whatever, because like I really don't know at this point what in the hell the number is. Like, it's just a situation where I think we're gonna see a lot of ambiguity around it, and we are seeing a lot of ambiguity around it because all these big programs, Ohio State, Alabama, go down the list, they're all carrying a lot more than 85 kids in, certain periods of the calendar. By the time you get to August, or I guess September, how is that defined? What classes are these guys counted against? I don't know. It's all very interesting, but when the limit of 25 kids per a recruiting class went out the window, it feels like in a lot of ways the 85 number kind of went out the window as well, because with the portal moving around, like, it's just, in a way, there's kind of all this math happening that is kind of up in the air in terms of, well, there's this window coming and that window coming, and that window's not closed yet, and these kids aren't even on campus yet in some cases. So honestly, your guess is as good as mine, to be totally truthful with you. One of you asked kind of, who's the biggest competition for Georgia in 2024, which I thought was a good question, interesting question. Kind of, what do we expect? I think that if you look at the UGA aspect of things, I don't really have concerns about the offensive line. I know that you're losing Mims. I know that you lose Cedric Van Pran. They feel great about Jared Wilson. That kid's an elite center. I think they feel like, no, you can't replace Cedric necessarily, but I think they feel good about not having a big drop off there or a weakness. Monroe Freeling is kind of the guy I think that you'd hope wins that right tackle position, or the left tackle position, I should say, maybe. Or no, Green's at left tackle. Yeah, so maybe Freeling at right tackle, but I'm not worried about offensive line. There's too much talent in that room to, once again, you kind of overwhelm the problem. The question, though, as far as Georgia is like, can they fix this sort of, they got run on in the SEC championship game. Like, I don't think anybody close to the program would deny that. So what does that mean exactly for 2024 is dependent on, who are going to be those better running teams. Ohio State has brought in this sort of dream team of running backs with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson already being in the room, but I, don't know. Do they really have an offensive line that's going to push a Georgia around? Like, their offensive line, I thought, was the weakness of that entire team last year, and yes, I think they struggled more in pass pro than they did in run blocking, but if Jordan Hall hits for Georgia or Kristen Miller hits for Georgia, like I don't see Ohio State being able to run the ball on UGA, and I don't really see the Kansas State quarterback that they portaled being a guy that's going to go out and throw on a secondary with the talent that Georgia has in it. So we'll see how it pans out, but I would say that like I'm bullish for Georgia right now. I think Texas is a legit contender. Obviously Alabama. I know that Sabin is gone, but there is still an elite amount of talent in that program that can do lots of things. You put that many great players into a room, lightning can kind of strike. You saw that with Washington and DeBoer last year, and I think DeBoer is a guy who has shown like he can win some games by scheme. Texas first year in the SEC, I'm really interested to see how they handle that grind, and I'm curious, where is their line of scrimmage play by the time, not even getting to November, December, but even by the time Georgia goes to town and plays them in Austin, which is, when? Mid-October? Yeah, October 19th. They're going to have taken some lumps and all of that. And I think with this schedule, there's the regular season and then you have this postseason tournament, and it's probably going to be a war of attrition at times with some of these best teams. And you're talking about, going and winning 3-4 games in December and January. For UGA, I think they set up really, really well on the line of scrimmage in terms of, if we lose a body, we should be able to plug this body into the position. I think they've recruited well enough up on the line of scrimmage where they can solve those problems that most teams probably, like if your starting right tackle or your starting center goes down in the first quarter of a college football playoff game, that might break everything for you. Great example of that is the Clemson team that Georgia faced in the opener in 2021. They had a young offensive line across the board, but that center that was out for them, having to play, I think it was a true freshman center in that game, it just wrecked everything for that offense, So those are the things that I think about, is just who has the line of scrimmage depth to kind of sustain injuries. And where Georgia's players going to be, obviously, they got to stay healthy too, but Georgia, when you recruit as well as they do, you have the advantage of, by the time you get to November, December, especially January, like these kids aren't really freshmen anymore. So I am like Joseph Jonah Ajonye, the 5-star defensive lineman that Georgia just signed. By the time we get to, the Tennessee game on November 16th, is he a guy that is, because we know he's a freaky athlete. So by the time we get to November 16, does he know all of his keys well enough to give you, 12 snaps a game, 15 snaps a game? If he does, that's a huge, huge release valve in terms of the pressure that's on everybody else on your defensive front. So, while other teams might be losing guys, the teams that recruit the best, especially up front, they might be kind of, getting extra players into the rotation. Yeah. So that's my thought on it. again, too early. I mean, we still have another portal window away to before we know what these rosters will even look like. And once we get on the other side of spring practice is when I'll really start kind of digging into this is who I think is going to make the playoff. Obviously, we got to pick 12 playoff teams this year, which I still haven't really fully wrapped my mind around, but I'm still riding high off of predicting Washington to to make the CFP in August of last year. So fingers crossed, we'll get another one right, and all of us can maybe cash it in together. So that is all I've got for you guys this evening. I hope you'll come and check us out over on Dog Central. Um, check us out on TPL Georgia, the Players Lounge Georgia site. That's where all of my kind of written content and intel stuff is now. My buddy Jason, who's one of my partners at Dog Central, he put up a post earlier today about a player who might be committing to UGA tomorrow. So go check that out if you're not over there. And hope all of you have an excellent weekend. And we'll try to do this pretty much weekly between now and the season. So hope you guys will make it part of your routine. Until later, thanks for being here.